Well, I grew up in England. I was born down on the South Sea coast. So if you know England, right down here, maybe 100 miles from London, in a little town called Poole, Poole. And I lived in southern England until I was about 12 years old. My father was a war hero in World War II in India. So my memories are more related to that. And when I was about 12 years old, my father decided that he wanted to experience the American dream, which I called the make-a-buck myth, because the myth was that we never had much money. So we arrived in New York City, came on a boat, about as old as the Titanic, but more successful, and lived in the Bronx. So some of my earliest American memories were hot dogs, the Statue of Liberty, and American kids saying, "Hey, Slimy Limey, when are you going to learn to speak English?" So English, and timing is everything, because this was a few years before the Beatles. And if I had only come to America after the Beatles, I would have been cool. Instead, I was the geek who couldn't speak English. Well, at that age, you do what your parents want you to do. So we moved to Florida, and I went to high school in Florida.
Where in Florida?
Pompano Beach, home of the bean pickers. This is a time when Florida had little tourists. You could literally go right to the beach. Now it's all condos for miles behind the beaches. So I kind of grew up there. Kind of important to me is when I arrived in New York, I was an English kid who had never seen a person of color in his life. 1950s England was not a segregated society. There were not people of color living in England. Today it's very different. So I arrived in New York City, and I lived in a boys' orphanage for a year. And all of the kids in the orphanage were black and Hispanic, Puerto Rican, African Americans. And very powerful experience. I mean, coming from England, living in the Bronx. When I went to Florida, racially segregated. The railroad tracks literally divided the town. So the juxtaposition of those three experiences probably are the most important experiences in my life in terms of what I believe in.